The stranger at the edge of the field. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Marcus Chun first saw her. He had been walking the fence line of his grandfather's old farm, checking for damage from the storm, when he noticed something strange near the rusted gate that marked the edge of his property. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer that had wandered too close to the human zones. But as he got closer, his heart began to pound in his chest. It was not an animal, it was a girl, or something shaped like a girl. Collapsed against a fence post with her face pressed into the mud. Her skin was the color of moonlight mixed with ocean water, a pale silver blue that seemed to glow even in the gray afternoon light. She had 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5, and her hair fell around her face in strands of deep violet that stuck to her wet cheeks. Marcus stopped walking and stood very still. He knew what she was. Everyone on Earth knew about the aliens now. It had been 12 years since the Galactic Concord had made first contact with humanity, and those 12 years had not been kind to the human race. The Concord was an alliance of dozens of alien species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years when they discovered Earth. They did not come as friends. They came as judges. Humanity was placed under what they called containment status, which meant that humans were not allowed to leave Earth, not allowed to develop certain technologies, and not allowed to have any real voice in galactic affairs. The aliens said it was for the galaxy's protection. They said humans were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted among the stars. Marcus had lost his sister in the integration wars, when some humans had tried to fight back against the Concord's rules, had learned the hard way that resistance was pointless. So he had come to his grandfather's farm to live alone, to grow his crops, and to stay far away from anything that might bring trouble to his door. But now trouble had found him. Anyway, the alien girl lifted her head and looked at him with eyes like shattered purple crystals. There was no threat in those eyes. There was only fear, deep and terrible fear, the kind that Marcus recognized from the faces of refugees he had seen during the wars. "Please," she said in a voice that was rough and broken. She spoke in common galactic, the language that all Earth's people had been forced to learn after first contact. "Please, I need shelter, just for a little while. I will not cause you harm. I will leave soon. Please." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He knew what the law said. Harboring an unregistered alien on Earth was one of the most serious crimes a human could commit. The punishment was permanent exile to the labor moons of Karath 7, where prisoners worked until they died in the cold and the dark. If he helped her, he would be risking everything: his farm, his freedom, his life. He should walk away. He should pretend he never saw her. He should go back to his house and forget that this ever happened. But the rain was cold, and she was shaking, and something in those purple eyes reminded him of his sister. On the last day he ever saw her, his sister had been afraid too, and no one had helped her. Marcus reached out his hand. "Can you stand?" he asked. The alien girl stared at his hand like she did not understand what it meant. Then, slowly, she reached up and took it. Her fingers were cold and wet and strange against his skin, but her grip was weak, the grip of someone who had used up all their strength just to survive. He pulled her to her feet and put his arm around her to keep her from falling. "My house is not far," he said. "Come with me." He did not ask her name, did not ask where she came from or why she was here. He just walked with her through the rain, step by step, until they reached the old farmhouse where he had lived alone for 3 years inside. He sat her down by the fire and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, made her drink hot tea and eat bread with butter. She ate like someone who had not had food in days, when she was warm and dry, and her hands had stopped shaking. She finally spoke again. "My name is Kiraveth," she said, "but you may call me Kira." "I am Marcus," he replied. "Marcus," she repeated, as if testing how the word felt in her mouth. "Why did you help me, Marcus?" It was a simple question. But the way she asked it made Marcus think that she truly did not understand. "Because you needed help," he said. Kira shook her head slowly. "You do not know me," she said. "You do not know what I have done or why I am here. I could be a criminal. I could be dangerous. I could bring destruction to your home, and still you helped me. Why?" Marcus thought about the question for a moment. He thought about his sister and his grandfather, and all the things he had lost in the years since the aliens came. He thought about the world outside his farm, where humans lived under the thumb of species that saw them as little more than clever animals, and he thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had decided humanity was not worth trusting. "I helped you because that is what people do," he said at last. "When someone is hurt and afraid and alone, you help them. It does not matter who they are or where they come from. You just help them. Because that is the right thing to do." Kira stared at him with those strange purple eyes. "That is not logical," she whispered. "No," Marcus agreed. "It is just human." Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere far above, in the cold darkness between the stars, the powers of the galaxy had no idea that everything was about to change, because they had never understood what humans were truly capable of. Not violence, not destruction, but something far more dangerous: kindness. The quiet season, the weeks passed slowly on the old farm, marked by the rhythm of work and rest and the changing of the seasons. Kira healed day by day. Though her wounds were not all visible to the eye, Marcus learned that she was Valorian, one of the founding species of the Galactic Concord. The Valorians were ancient and proud, a people who had traveled among the stars when humanity's ancestors were still living in caves. They were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom, their beauty, and their absolute devotion to law and order. But Kira had been cast out from her people. She showed Marcus the scar on her shoulder where her family crest had been burned away, erased as if she had never existed. Her name had been removed from every record. Her bloodline declared broken. Her existence officially ended among the Valorians. Exile was a fate worse than death. To be exiled was to become nothing. A ghost had walked, but had no place in the world of the living. Marcus asked her what she had done to deserve such punishment. Kira was quiet for a long time before she answered. "I spoke against the decision to classify humans as a contained threat species," she said, "in the assembly, before all the representatives of the Concord. I argued that humanity should be given a chance, that your people had potential, that you could be partners instead of prisoners." She looked down at her hands, those four-fingered hands that were so different from his own. "I said that fear was not a good enough reason to cage an entire species," she continued. "I said that we had no right to decide the future of a world we did not understand, and for that, I was called a traitor to my own kind." Marcus listened without speaking. He had never imagined that any alien had ever argued in favor of humanity in all the years since first contact. He had only ever seen the Concord as an enemy, a collection of cold and distant powers that looked down on Earth with contempt. But here was Kira, who had lost everything because she believed that humans deserved better. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why did you speak for us?" Kira smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Because I had studied your history," she said. "I had read about your wars and your cruelty. Yes, but I had also read about your kindness, your art, your music, your stories. I had seen how you loved each other and how you fought for things that could not be measured or counted." She looked at him with those purple crystal eyes. "I saw a species that was capable of both terrible darkness and beautiful light," she said. "And I believed that the light deserved a chance to grow." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so instead of speaking, he showed her. He taught her how to work the farm, how to plant seeds and pull weeds and harvest crops when the time was right. He showed her how to fix the old machines that his grandfather had left behind, how to patch a leaky roof, how to make bread from flour and yeast, and he taught her how to make coffee the way his grandmother had taught him. Dark and strong, with just a little bit of honey, Kira learned quickly she had a sharp mind and careful hands. And she threw herself into the work as if it could fill the emptiness inside her. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, Marcus would catch her watching him with a look of confusion on her face. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, she finally put her confusion into words. "You gain nothing from helping me," she said. "Your laws forbid my presence here. Your species has no power to bargain with mine. I cannot repay you for your kindness. I cannot protect you from the consequences if we are discovered. So why do you continue to let me stay?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee and thought about the question. "I told you before," he said. "I helped you because you needed help. That has not changed." "But it is not logical," Kira insisted. "In the Concord, every action must have a purpose. Every relationship must have a benefit. Nothing is given without expectation of return. That is how civilized species behave." Marcus laughed. "A soft and gentle sound. Then maybe humans are not civilized," he said. "Or maybe we just have a different idea of what civilization means." He set down his coffee cup and looked at her. "Where I come from, we do not help people because we expect something back," he said. "We help people because helping is good. Because it makes the world a little less cold and a little less cruel. Because kindness is its own reward." Kira shook her head slowly. "I have lived for over 200 of your years," she said. "I have traveled to 100 worlds and studied 1,000 cultures. And I have never encountered a species that truly believes what you are saying." "Then maybe you have been looking in the wrong places," Marcus replied. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Those were the same stars that the Concord ruled. The same stars that had been forbidden to humanity. But sitting here on this old porch, they did not look cold or distant. They looked like possibilities. "The Concord fears your species," Kira said quietly. "They have always feared you from the first moment they discovered your world." "Because we are violent," Marcus said, repeating what he had heard 1,000 times. "No," Kira replied, and there was something strange in her voice. Something like wonder. "Because you are unpredictable. Because you form bonds without calculation. Because you show mercy to those who have done nothing to earn it. Because you fight for things that cannot be measured." She turned to look at him. "They do not fear what you might destroy," she said. "They fear what you might become." Marcus did not answer, but somewhere deep inside him, in a place that had been cold and dark for a very long time, something began to warm. Maybe the aliens were right to be afraid, because a species that could show kindness to a stranger, without reason, without reward, without any hope of benefit, that was a species that could change the galaxy. The Hunt Begins commander Dex Orn of the Valorian enforcement caste had been hunting exiles for over a century. He was good at his job. The Valorians did not forget those who had betrayed them, and Dex Orn was the instrument of their long memory he had tracked Kiraveth's biosignature across 3 systems before it finally led him to the Sol system, to the small blue world that the Concord had placed under. Continental Thong felt nothing but contempt when he looked at the planet through the view screen of his warship. That a daughter of Valoria would hide among these primitives was fitting. He thought vermin seeking shelter with vermin. He sent a formal notification to Earth's government that he would be entering their atmosphere to retrieve an escaped exile. The humans protested. Of course, they cited treaties and agreements and diplomatic procedure aesthetics. Ren ignored them. The Concord's authority was absolute, and humans had no standing to refuse anything. His warship descended through the clouds, following the biosignature to a rural region far from the major cities. He brought 50 soldiers with him, armed with weapons that could level a small town. It was more than enough to deal with one exile and whatever primitive creature had been foolish enough to shelter her. They found the farmhouse just as the sun was beginning to set. It was a simple building, old and worn, surrounded by fields of crops and rusted machinery. Thexarin ordered his soldiers to form a perimeter around the property. Then he walked toward the house, ready to drag the traitor back to face Valorian justice. But when he reached the front of the building, he stopped. A human male was standing on the porch. He was not running, he was not hiding, he was just standing there, calm and still, with an old weapon in his hands. It was a primitive thing, a projectile weapon that used chemical propellant to fire metal slugs against Valorian armor. It would be almost useless, but the human held it like he knew how to use it. Kiraveth is a criminal exile, Thexarin announced, his voice cold and formal. She is to be returned to Valorian custody immediately. Surrender her to us, and you will not be harmed. The human did not move. She is not going anywhere, he said. Thexarin felt a flash of irritation. He had dealt with resistance before, but usually the primitives had the sense to back down when they saw the power arrayed against them. You are one human with an ancient weapon, he said. I have 50 soldiers with technology your species cannot even comprehend. Do not be foolish. The human smiled, and there was something in that smile that Thexarin did not understand. Look behind you, the human said. Thexarin turned. More humans were emerging from the fields and the trees and the dirt road that led to the farm. They came on foot and in old vehicles, carrying weapons of every kind. Some had rifles like the man on the porch. Others had shotguns or pistols or hunting bows. One old woman carried nothing but a heavy iron pan. There were 17 of them in all. Farmers and mechanics and shopkeepers. Ordinary people who had no business standing against a Valorian enforcement squad. They formed a line between the soldiers and the farmhouse. None of them looked afraid. What is the meaning of this? Thexarin demanded. A man in dirty work clothes stepped forward. He was older than the one on the porch, with gray in his hair and grease on his hands. Marcus called us, he said simply. Told us someone was trying to take his friend. So we came. His friend, Thexarin repeated, and he could not keep the disbelief from his voice. The exile is not of your species. She is not of your world. She has nothing to offer you. Why would you risk your lives for her? The man shrugged. Because Marcus asked, he said, and because it is the right thing to do. Thexarin looked at the humans. These small and fragile creatures who should have been running in terror. He looked at their primitive weapons and their worn clothing and their stubborn, unafraid faces, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something that might have been uncertainty. Activated his communication device and sent a message to his ship. Prepare to broadcast this encounter to the enforcement network, he ordered. I want a record of what happens when primitives defy the Concord, he thought. That showing the galaxy how easily these humans were defeated would serve as a warning to others. He did not realize that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The standoff lasted for 6 hours. Thexarin made threats and demands. The humans did not move. He ordered his soldiers to advance. The humans raised their weapons. He considered giving the order to fire, to simply destroy these foolish creatures and take the exile by force. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the humans looked at him. Without hatred, without fear, with nothing but quiet determination. Maybe it was the old woman with the iron pan, who stood in the front line as if she faced death every day and had long since stopped being afraid of it. Maybe it was the knowledge that his broadcast was being recorded, that the galaxy would see everything he did, whatever the reason. Thexarin hesitated, and while he hesitated, the broadcast leaked. It spread from the enforcement network to the civilian channels. from the Valorian systems to the wider galaxy within hours. Billions of beings across 100 worlds were watching a handful of humans stand against a Valorian warship. They were watching. Farmers and mechanics and an old woman with a pan refused to surrender. A stranger who was not even of their species. They were watching. And they were asking questions. Why would they do this? What kind of species risks everything for someone they own nothing to? What kind of species stands against impossible odds for the sake of a friend? The Concorde had spent 12 years telling the galaxy that humans were dangerous animals who needed to be contained. Now the galaxy was starting to wonder if they had been lied to. The reckoning, the grand assembly of the Galactic Concorde, had not seen such chaos in 300 cycles. Representatives from dozens of species filled the vast chamber, their voices rising and falling in waves of argument and accusation on the central platform. The holographic image of the standoff on Earth played on a continuous loop. 17 humans with primitive weapons standing against a Valorian enforcement squad, refusing to surrender, refusing to back down, refusing to abandon the stranger who had nothing to offer them in return. Ambassador Yelthin of the Moravi Collective was the first to demand answers. The Moravi were an insectoid species, ancient and wise, known throughout the galaxy for their commitment to justice. "Explain this to me," Yelthin said, pointing one of their many limbs at the image. "Explain why these humans, a species we have classified as dangerous and unpredictable, are being praised across a dozen systems for what they call basic decency." The Valorian representative tried to respond, but the Kreth ambassador interrupted. The Kreth were massive, stone-like beings who rarely spoke in assembly meetings. When they did speak, others listened. "We demand an investigation into Valorian exile practices," the Kreth ambassador rumbled. "If this female was cast out simply for speaking in favor of another species, then your laws are not justice. They are tyranny." The chamber erupted in shouting. The Valorians accused the Kreth of interference. The Moravi demanded order. The Sylphine matriarchy, a species of elegant serpentine beings, watched everything with cold and calculating eyes. When the noise finally died down, the Sylphine representative spoke. "Perhaps," she said in her soft and dangerous voice, "we have been too hasty in our judgment of the humans. Perhaps the contained threat designation was based on fear rather than evidence." "Fear is evidence," the Valorian representative snapped. "Humans are violent. They are unpredictable. They cannot be trusted." "And yet," the Sylphine replied, "they stood against your warship not to attack, but to protect. They risked their lives not for power or territory, but for a single stranger who had done nothing to earn their loyalty. Tell me, which of our species would do the same?" No one answered. The silence stretched on and on. Finally, Ambassador Yelthin rose again. "I move that the exile known as Kiraveth be brought before this assembly to testify," they said. "Not as a criminal, but as a witness. Let her speak of what she has seen among the humans. Let her tell us whether our fears are justified." The motion passed by a narrow margin, and so Kira came to the Grand Assembly. She stood on the central platform, small and alone, facing the representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Marcus had wanted to come with her, but humans were not allowed in the assembly chamber, so she faced them alone, carrying with her the lessons she had learned on a small farm on a small planet at the edge of known space. She spoke. For 9 hours, she told them about the rain and the mud and the man who had offered his hand to a stranger. She told them about the coffee and the bread and the sunsets watched from an old wooden porch. She told them about the neighbors who had come when Marcus called, not because they owed him anything, but because he had asked. She told them about kindness given without expectation of return, about friendship that crossed the boundaries of species and world, about a people who believed, truly and deeply believed, that helping others was its own reward. "We feared humanity because they are unpredictable," Kira said. her voice growing stronger as she spoke. We feared them because they form bonds without calculation, because they show mercy to those who have done nothing to earn it, because they fight for things that cannot be measured or counted. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had once been her peers, who had cast her out for speaking these same truths. But I have lived among them, she continued. I have seen what they truly are, and I tell you now that we were wrong to fear them. We should have been learning from them. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. We feared them because they reminded us of what we have forgotten how to be, she said. We forgot what it meant to help without reward, to love without condition, to stand for what is right, even when the cost is everything. The humans never forgot, and that is not a threat. It is a gift. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Then, slowly, Ambassador Yelthin of the Moravi Collective rose from their seat. I move to reconsider Earth's classification, they said. I move that the contained threat designation be reviewed and potentially revoked. The vote was held immediately. It was not close over. 2/3 of the assembly voted in favor of the motion for the first time in 12 years. The galaxy was willing to look at humanity with new eyes. The Valorian enforcement squad withdrew from Earth without taking Kira commander. Vexorn was recalled to face questions about his conduct and across the galaxy. Beings of every species began to speak of the humans, not as dangerous animals to be caged, but as something new, something unexpected, something that might just change everything all, because one man had offered his hand to a stranger in the rain. What the galaxy learned in 6 months had passed. Since the standoff on the farm, 6 months since Kira's testimony. Before the Grand Assembly, 6 months since the galaxy had begun to see humanity with new eyes, and now the day had come that no one on Earth had ever dared to. Imagine the ceremony was held in the capital city, in a great plaza that had been built in the years after first contact. Thousands of humans had gathered to watch, their faces turned up toward the sky where alien ships hung like silver stars. But these ships had not come as conquerors or jailers, they had come as witnesses today. Earth would officially be welcomed into the Galactic Concord as a full member species. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention that had followed him since the standoff. He had never wanted to be famous. He had never wanted to be a symbol. He had just wanted to help a stranger. Like a stranger who needed help, but the galaxy had other plans. Reporters from a dozen worlds had come to interview him. Historians wanted to record his story. Children on planets he had never heard of knew his name. He did not understand any of it. Kira stood beside him, watching the ceremony with an expression that mixed joy and wonder. She was no longer an exile. The Valorian government had been forced to overturn her banishment after the Assembly's vote. Her family crest had been restored to her shoulder. Her name returned to the records of her people. She could go home whenever she wished, but she had not left. You could be up there, she said, nodding toward the platform where the ceremony was taking place. They wanted you to speak, you know. They wanted you to represent humanity to the galaxy. Marcus shook his head. That is not my place, he said. I am just a farmer. I do not know how to speak for a whole species. Kira smiled. And that is exactly why you should be the one doing it, she replied on the platform. A woman named Ellen Park was being sworn in as Earth's first true ambassador to the Galactic Concord. She was the retired schoolteacher who had stood on Marcus's porch with her grandfather's shotgun, refusing to let injustice go unchallenged. She was 73 years old, with gray hair and gentle eyes and a spine of pure steel. When the Concord representatives had asked Earth to choose an ambassador, the people had chosen her, not a politician, not a general, not a scientist or a billionaire or a celebrity. They had chosen an old woman who had been willing to die for a stranger, because that, they decided, was what humanity should look like to the stars. Ellen spoke to the crowd and to the watching galaxy. Her voice calm and clear, she did not make grand promises or dramatic declarations. She simply said that humanity was ready to join the community of species, to learn from them and to share what Earth had to offer. She said that humans were not perfect, that they had made mistakes and would make more. But she also said that they would always try to do what was right, to help those who needed help, to stand up for those who could not stand for themselves. That is who we are, she said. That is who we have always been, and that is who we will continue to be. Among the stars, the crowd cheered. The alien representatives bowed their heads in acknowledgement, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, the old powers of the galaxy began to understand what they had awakened. The ceremony ended. But Marcus and Kira stayed in the plaza. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the alien ships above caught the light like diamonds scattered across the heavens. You changed everything, Kira said quietly. One act of kindness, and you changed the course of galactic history. Marcus looked at her with genuine confusion on his face. I did not change anything, he said. I just did what anyone would do. Kira shook her head slowly. That is exactly what makes your species extraordinary, she replied. You truly believe that you cannot imagine a universe where compassion is not the default, where kindness is not the first response. She looked up at the stars that were now open to humanity, the stars that had once been forbidden. The galaxy thought they needed to be protected from you, she said. They saw your wars and your weapons and your capacity for destruction, and they were afraid. But they did not understand what they were really seeing. And what were they really seeing? Marcus asked. Kira turned to face him, and there were tears in her purple crystal eyes. They were seeing a species that had every reason to be cruel, she said. A species that had suffered and struggled and fought for survival on a world that did not make it easy. A species that knew pain and loss and despair, and yet chose kindness anyway. She reached out and took his hand, her 4 fingers wrapping around his 5. That is what makes you dangerous, she said. Not your violence, but your hope. Not your weapons, but your stubborn, irrational belief that the universe can be better than it is. Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he did what he had always done. He simply stood with his friend and watched the future unfold above them. The stars were coming out. One by one, soon the night sky would be filled with light. Pinpricks of distant suns that marked worlds and species that humanity was only beginning to know it. Had taken so long to get here, so much pain and struggle and fear, but now the journey was finally beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same because they had learned what Earth's children had always known, that the measure of a species was not in its weapons or its technology or its age among the stars. It was in what they did when a stranger came to their door, cold and afraid, with nothing to offer but need. The humans had answered that question. They had answered it with open hands and open hearts, and the galaxy had no choice but to listen far away. In the halls of the Grand Assembly, historians were already beginning to write the story of this moment. They called it the human emergence. They called it the beginning of a new age, but Marcus did not think of it that way. He thought of it as what it truly was, just people helping people, just kindness given, without expectation of return, just a simple, stubborn, irrational belief that everyone deserved a chance. That was all it had ever been, and that was more than enough to change the stars.